Praise the Lord. Jesus is the way and the truth and the life, and no man comes to the Father but through me, saith the Lord. There were a number of pieces of paper sent to me, and they're calling them summonses to court. One was for trying to get the bus to Dublin while not wearing a mask, and the other not actually travelling on the bus on that day, but actually just trying to get on the bus. And the day previously, the guard showed up with no masks on. And were like right beside me, so it doesn't make any sense. But the second day there was no guard there, so I don't know how they established reasonable excuse. So it's all on foot of a claim, or sorry, not reasonable excuse, but reasonable suspicion. They haven't said I've broken any law, so I have a freedom to travel. So in order to stand by my fellow man and on my rights as a man of the land, a freedom to engage services on reasonable and fair grounds that have been scientifically substantiated, not just the hearsay or a judge's opinion, but actually substantiated, not just the opinion of the bus driver or anything of that sort, but actually proven. Now, I don't have to show my medical effects to anybody, whether the minister says so or not. It's really not up to him. It's not a matter of his opinion. I have certain freedoms, and one of them is like privacy to my personal effects, like medical information and stuff like that. So you wouldn't allow a bus driver to root in your purse or in your handbag or something like that just so you can get on the bus. So you can't expect to have that authority over you. So if I was to show up to court on foot of a felonious and fallacious summons, I would be aiding and abetting people to undermine the Constitution in which I'm entrusted to pass on to the next generation. And I'd be willingly doing that. I'd be willingly showing up and saying, right, I want to contract with you on this basis. I want to have this discussion with you on that basis. And I'd be entering into a discussion with them and acknowledging and vindicating their position. Now, some might say, that's not really doing that because you're going there but you're going there to discuss on that premise. So you're validating by showing up to a court that's purporting to have that authority. You're validating that, and you're seeing their authority on that basis by showing up that day. I don't believe they have a lawful authority in this instance. So within my rights, I'm not going to show up to court. And I'm telling you, it's not because I will be sleeping in that day, and it's not because I'm contemptuous towards the court, but it's rather because I stand up for my own rights and the rights of my fellow man and my fellow countryman, and I say no to that tyranny. And because if I show up to court on that day and allow people to take time out of my day and just on unreasonable and unlawful premises, they say, well, we have a health act, well, or there's a statutory instrument. Well, you can't just put a statutory instrument in place that brings to life new powers that can be afforded to anybody you say willy-nilly on the basis of your opinion. I mean, this just doesn't make any sense. It's just unreasonable, irrational behaviour from people who should know better because they're learned, educated, and they have the relevant certification. So they should know better. It doesn't mean that they have carte blanche. They're still held to account for their behaviour and on a reasonable basis, on reasonable grounds. So what I'm saying to you is that if I show up to court on that day, I'm saying, yeah, you can roughshod over me. You can tell me when I have to be in court and not, and you don't even have to fulfill the basic requirements in order to bring somebody before the court. So in doing that, in showing up, you're saying, well, I relinquish my rights. I acquiesce to this tyranny. So I just want to put it out there that I'm in no way contemptuous towards a legitimate premise under which I might be brought before the court. And I will absolutely utilise the proper channels within which to have the conversation. But I won't be showing up to court to answer a summons that is felonious and fallacious and can be shown to be simply by comparing it to the law of the land. So every citizen should have that information, because in law, ignorance is no excuse. So I encourage you to buy a copy of the Constitution. You can download it on your phone. It's relatively cheap. I think it'd be less than £5. It's not a very extensive read. It's not very long. You don't need to be very, very clever. And by a couple of pages in, you'll get a kind of a flow of the language used. And you can always Google search a word you don't understand, of course. So there's no real reason. I mean, you'll see the print is quite small, but even at that, there's only 200 odd pages. A lot of it is index, so much of it is index. There you have index and everything there. So index, index Traore is, well, the index takes up a good bit of it. So there's just about 210 pages of the Constitution, and half of those are it being repeated in Irish. So there's really only about 105 pages to get through. And the text is about that size. So I mean, most novels would be longer than that. So people really should be reading their Constitution to know their rights and their responsibilities. And I have a responsibility towards my fellow man to not acquiesce to sorts of tyranny that would put my child's rights into prejudice and in jeopardy. So if I wouldn't expect my child to have to do it, why would I do it myself and agree to it? I wouldn't watch my daughter getting bullied and say, right, you have to put on this or you're going to be called before the court. I wouldn't stand for that willingly. Now, as Christians, we're easily imposed upon. If somebody was to grab me, I'm not going to fight them, because Jesus tells us not to. But I'm telling you that I'm not going to be showing up to court with the tie on, suitably dressed, so I can be led around, because I acknowledge the rights of my fellow man, and I care about my fellow man, and I love my child, and I love my brothers and sisters and my father and grandfathers, and I care about their rights and the next generation's rights and their rights after that, when they're wheeling their children around in the buggy and so on and so forth. I care. And so who would I be if I just showed up to court and said, okay, all right? Well, peaceably, I don't have to. So what they do hereafter is indicative as to whether we're living in a tyrannical state or not. Because reasonable suspicion has to be established. Etc., etc., so on and so forth. Reasonable suspicion. Presumption of innocence. How can you establish reasonable suspicion on foot of a complaint alone? So there seems to be more and more of this he said, she said stuff, and guards are responding to it. He did, she did stuff, and guards are responding to it in the absence of having to establish as to whether a crime was committed, or having to establish as to whether there's reasonable suspicion as to whether a crime has been committed or not. So how can you summons me to court if there's no reasonable suspicion, if you weren't there to establish it? So do you see all this relevant person stuff is an undermining of law? Anything that affords an individual to subjectively forego due process to make a decision subjectively and forego due process is an undermining of the Irish Constitution. Now, they can fiddle around with it all they want to keep moving the chip around the board, but that's fundamentally what it is. So if I love you, knowing what I know, if I love you and I care about you, just acquiescing and showing up to a summons that's so fallacious and felonious as that, according to my good conscience and my understanding of the Constitution, it would be in contravention of your rights for me to show up. Does that make sense to you? Because I'd be setting up a stage then for others to say, oh, that man went into court and when he was summoned on that basis. So then now I'm setting up a stage. I'm joining them in setting up the stage. Right, lads, put the props out there, and I'm going, right, I'll be this character, I'll be this role in the stage show here. That makes it look like this is that or the other thing. Even though it's not. When you read the Constitution, it can't be that. That doesn't matter. Sure, they're doing it. So you see, as long as they're doing it, then they can give the impression that this is the law, even though it's not. So I'm not going to do that. How can I care about my old flower who died to give me these rights if I'm just going to show up to court on a tyrannical basis, on a basis of a summons that they wouldn't even sign? No crime has been committed. But they say that I have to take time out of my day to show up to court. No reasonable suspicion established or given. Not signed. This guard of this station. Nothing like that. Well, it's not going to be me. I'm not going to be that guy, that prop in the stage. I'm not that plaintiff. Not willingly. But Jesus said, be easily imposed upon and appeal to Caesar. Paul appealed to Caesar. That's what he did. And his word shows that. God's word shows that. So they might stick me in the back of the cart, but I'll be talking all the way to everybody along the road. Because I'm chatty like that. Praise the Lord. So I want to restate that I'm not being contemptuous. I value the courts. I have illustrated that. I've shown that all the way along. That I do value and appreciate the guards and what they do. I do value and appreciate the courts. They are necessary. But when this type of stuff starts happening, then no, I'm not going to acquiesce willingly. And be easily imposed upon, meek in my actions, respectful and honourable in business, do no harm to neighbour, but I will not willingly acquiesce to something that's unlawful, because that would not be loving my neighbour. That would be sailing them down the river, taking part in the stage show. So no, if you know something to be wrong, then partaking of it is aiding and abetting in it. It's playing a role. So when you know something to be right, do it. So no, I won't be taking part. Come what may, I won't be taking part. So Jesus is the way and the truth and the life. Because if men can die for these rights, I cannot show up to court for them. I love you dearly. I care about your soul. And only through Jesus can we be together forever. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe in him would not perish but have everlasting life. Blessings, beloved.